So I've gone ahead and pressed record, and I just want to welcome everyone that's going to listen to this later and people that are here now to hear from us, your Ready, Set, Sweat coaches. And specifically, we have Coach Mike with us today, and we're going to talk about race prioritization. We're going to talk about the concept of A, B, and C races and all kinds of other cool stuff. So I'm excited that you guys made it and want to hear from us. We have just a lot of ideas, a lot of things we want to kind of just have a conversation about. So that's going to be our format today, is just sort of talking about this idea of race prioritization. But before I do that, let me go ahead and just introduce Coach Mike and let him tell you just a minute about kind of his background. I think you guys all know me. If you don't, I'm Coach Allie. I've been here with Ready, Set, Sweat since 2013, helping people meet their goals and reach their dreams and things they want to do, and coached people from long distance swimming to Ironmans and everything in between. So Coach Mike, maybe tell us a little bit about your background and self.
Sure. So I've been a fitness person all my life because I spent 20 years in the military. And then not long after I retired from the military, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and I needed to find something where I could exercise every day because it helps control our blood sugar so much better. And I also needed to lose about 30 pounds. I had ballooned up to about 235, almost 240 at one point. So I had done some triathlon when I was in the Army and just couldn't keep it up because there were other commitments with the military, long hours, and then also 3 young kids coming up through sports. So I said, maybe now's a good time to try it again. And I did, and I just got hooked, and I over obsessed about it. And that first year, 2 years is where I really learned the importance of why you have to prioritize your races. You can't do every race full out. And I actually ended up at the end of those 2 seasons having injuries that caused me to lose fitness because of those injuries.
So this is kind of a topic that's near and dear to your heart because of kind of what you've gone through with it. So that's cool. In fact, I think this might have been your idea to do this webinar. I think you had suggested it. So I'm really glad, because it's a great idea to talk about this kind of stuff, and just thinking about kind of, how we approach our race season and kind of planning it out it isn't something that everyone thinks about. I mean, sometimes it's just sort of like, hey, the season's coming out. What do I want to do? And I just pick the races that just happen to be on the calendar, and they're just there. And as an athlete, it's the rare person that thinks about the season as a whole. And so you had some thoughts about, just as a person, what are some things about the uniqueness of the person that are important, as they start thinking about their season? What would you suggest?
Absolutely. The thing when we plan anything in sports, in life, in our triathlon training, we have to understand who we are. And that may sound simple, but for some people, it's a complex process of trying to really understand. For myself, I knew I was very much a type A personality. My whole personality was, I would dive into something wholehearted and give it my all. And then as I learned and made mistakes, I'd adjust. So when you're getting ready to start planning your races or your season, I think it's important, number one, to, as much as we hate to do this, we have to think about how old we are. When we're younger, our recovery times are so much faster. And for myself at age 61 now, I'm seeing a huge difference in the last 3 years in my recovery times. We have to think about our personality. Are you a type A competitor? Do you really want to set goals that you can say, looky, I got on the podium? Or are you more the person who's like, you know what, I'm just doing this for my health, and I love being around all these other people? It's important to know that. What are your priorities? Is triathlon one of your highest priorities that you have? Or is it more of a hobby? You have to ask yourself those questions. And then what are your other commitments? Coach Tom last year talked about something called the suck line. And that would be a good one to revisit again. And for a lot of people, they understand that you just can't do everything every week, particularly with triathlon, because you're trying to train usually 6 days a week, maybe 5 days a week. If you understand all those things about yourself, it should allow you to start looking and saying, am I going to have all these races, and how important are they to me, and all these other types of things that you just don't throw races on your calendar and hope you're going to do well. You can begin to prioritize your races based on those four items.
And there's some strategy to it too when you're putting them on the calendar. If you want to do well at some races, and that's kind of what we're going to get into about A's, B's, and C's. If you want to do well at some, sometimes you kind of have to, take it a little easier at other races to be able to prioritize. And that's important to understand kind of who you are, how old you are, what you're like, and what else you have going on, so that you can kind of fit those into your calendar in a way that's going to make you successful. Because nothing makes you feel more bummed out than just not knowing better and going in and racing a bunch of weekends in a row and having subpar performances, or just feeling like, well, I finished, but I wish I could have done better, and not knowing why. So I think that's really good. And so you had some ideas too about ways that when we kind of overdo it and we overtrain versus when we're undertrained, and sort of how tapering or backing off can influence our season. What are your thoughts on over and under training, and kind of how to plan that out?
So I think this goes hand in hand with understanding yourself. You need to sort of look back at what you've done in the past, particularly if you don't have a coach, because a coach is going to sort of help guide you through this. But if you're training on your own, which is perfectly fine, I did that for years, but you do have to look at your data. You don't have to become a data geek, but you got to understand where you've come from and where you're going. So are you overtraining? By overtraining, does it mean you're constantly tired? Do you struggle with motivation sometimes? You start out the season training great, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm just burnt out. There's too much going on. Are your times getting slower? Does it feel like where you used to take a couple days to recover, it's now taking you a week? And the thing about overtraining is you'll never have good race performances because your body's in a constant state of trying to recover. And number two, it exponentially, and exponentially, as you continue to overtrain, will increase your risk for injury from overuse and fatigue. Your body just needs time to recover. Now, undertraining, this tends to be more with people who may not be the type A personality, but they just sort of know they want to do it, but they're not sure why they're not getting any better. And again, this is where a coach can come in handy, or where you can look and see that you're just not pushing your body enough. What undertraining is going to do is, like I said, you're not going to be able to get to the next higher fitness level. And in some cases, that's okay. It depends if you're coming off an injury and things like that. But over a period of the whole season, you should continue to slowly get more fit and more fit if you're training correctly. And in most cases, if you're undertraining, your fitness level is actually going to decrease. You're just not going to make any gains because your body will adapt to your training. And that's called, sometimes we call it hitting a shelf or plateauing. And you'll be like, I'm doing the same workouts, but I'm not getting any better. I'm actually getting worse. And I've actually experienced that once before. So between those two, there's the idea of we're trying to slowly get better throughout the year, but you've also got to give your body time to recover in what we usually call a recovery week in your training plan. And that can be every so often. And then ultimately, as you get towards an A race, which we'll talk about in a minute, you're going to want to taper off that intensity and maybe even the frequency, so your body gets a chance to really self-energize. And when you go into that race, you're just feeling like you're like a horse. You can't be held back. You're ready to go. One of the things that you can do to look at all this is keep notes in your training peaks, if you use that, or just keep notes in your training diary about how you feel. How you feel is so important, because you can start to see, am I moving towards where I got injured the last time? Talk with your coach if you have one. Listen to your body. If you are just so burnt out that I just can't go today, can't get that bike ride in, can't get that swim in, whatever, missing one day, even 2 days as you're building up for a race, it's not going to make that big of a difference in your performance. What will make a difference in your performance is if you hurt yourself. So think about that. And then you have to understand your training plan. And as I use my fingers here to show that we're slowly getting higher and higher and higher. You want to know when you're going to hit those peaks during the season. And if you know where you're going to hit those peaks, then you can better decide what races are the most important to you or where you want to really perform the best. And you have to know that based on your age, your injury history, and desire and other commitments that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
On a final thought about overtraining and undertraining, everyone should know that even the elite athletes, the best Iron men and Iron women, and people who are competing on the national stage, their training plans only have them peaking a few times a year. So you can't make every ace an A race. If everything's a priority, nothing is a priority. And if nothing's a priority, your performance will suffer, or worse, you could get injured and not be able to race at all.
That's a good point, that even the best, this is not something where it's like, oh, this is the difference between them and us, that they even are limited by what they can do month to month and year to year. They have to limit their priorities and try not to race too many times, or, race hard too many times, just because it will suffer. And that's interesting too, what you said about making every race an A race. I definitely have sent like a list to different athletes and asked them, like, hey, tell me what you want to do. And sometimes it's like, they're all A's, like, and I feel that way too. Of course, I want to do my best. Everybody wants to, but you're right. You can do so much better when you actually choose ones that are going to be your A, and really go for those. I think it's actually, you do better than if you don't. Not only will you just kind of be flat in the other races, but when you do it this way, you'll really be faster overall and make progress year to year, and feel better about it mentally too. So I love what you said. ABC, easy as 1, 2, 3. I'm gonna sing the little.
That's our old school there for the day.
Yeah. So what are the thoughts on that? How do you help? How do people decide which are the most important to them? What should they be thinking about?
So this is something that I came up with over the years. Number one, the idea is which races are most important to you as an athlete, but why? Not just, well, Mountain Lakes is the most important race for me this year. Well, why is it the most important race? For me, it's because it previously was the Southeast Regional. And if you got in the top 10% of your age group, you qualified for nationals. And that was always a goal of mine. So you have to understand why you're saying this race is important. And once you do that, you might be easier for you to separate between A, B, and C. Just because a race is important doesn't mean it's an A race. Mm-hmm. So I sort of broke it up between, is this race important because it's competition? Is this race important because it's enjoyment? Or is this race important just for a training opportunity? I think that last one's the hardest one to sort of grasp. But once you begin to understand your whole year-long plan, then those start to fall in line. So we talk about competition goals. Competition goal will be something like you want to do a personal record. You want to get a podium. You want to finish your first time at a longer distance. So let's.
Uh-oh. We had a little bobble there. You still there? Let's see. Sorry, guys, we had a little bobble. Let me just make sure. Looks like our internet froze for a second. Let's check on it. Looks like it's connecting. Sorry